Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with a good friend, Bruce Reyes Chow. Reverend Bruce is an active speaker and writer on topics of faith, culture, race, and technology. He hosts the podcast BRC and Friends and has authored 5 books, including In Defense of Kindness, Why It Matters, How It Changes Our Lives, and How It Can Save the World. And his new book, Everything Good About God is True, Choosing Faith, which just released from Broadleaf Books. Bruce has been active in local politics and community organizations in the San Francisco Bay Area for nearly 3 decades. He's been an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church USA since 1995 and was the moderator of the PCUSA from 2008 to 2010. He's also a senior consultant and coach with Convergence and is a Gallup certified Clifton Strengths coach. Bruce also contributed to our How to Heal Our Divides book and has spoken at Writing for Your Life conferences that I produced in the past. You can learn more about Bruce at reyeschow.com. That's REYES-CHOW.com. So Bruce, congratulations on all of your amazing work, and thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's so good to be with you. I'm super excited about this last project, but also just I always love coming to talk with you.
Well,
Just you
same here.
and
We've really had some great collaborations that I'm
yeah,
very appreciative of, and hopeful that they'll continue.
yes, awesome.
So first, what else do you want to know? Do you want people to know about you
Oh
besides
gosh,
what
what
I kind
else
of
have you?
briefly touched on there?
I mean it's I mean that's pretty good. I mean I kind of am in this place now where I'm fully gig life, so I pastor churches for short periods of time. I work with conflicted churches. I'll come in and work with them for 3 or 4 months. It's a new thing we're calling bridge pastoring, and so I've done that a couple of times, helping communities move through conflict, and then doing a lot of just trying to live a meaningful whole life. I mean, not rush all the time. I mean, you've had some sickness, I've had some sickness in the past, and I hope that those things don't necessarily force us to slow down, but they remind us of what to do. And so I try
Yeah.
to really enjoy, probably like I should have always done, but really a little more intentionally. So I'm a big one of the things I took from pandemic is we have many house plants. Those of you that are watching this on video, you can see them behind me. All of these I've propagated myself, but I have one room that kind of looks like a jungle now. But so I do that. I have 3 adult children now who I love. They're all really involved with justice work, and so I get to kind of watch them create havoc in the world in good ways, and that's been lovely. And then, as our recording, I just returned from Palestine for 2 weeks. I was there for 2 weeks, and so that's been
How was
part of.
that?
It was I've been before, and so spent most of my time in the West Bank, meeting with predominantly Palestinian Christians, and it's really heavy, as you can imagine. Whenever you're listening to this, hopefully things will have gotten better. Uh, but I think a lot of people fear that the West Bank is next, and
Yeah.
that seems to be this weightiness that um, shopkeepers to business owners to just folks on the street and kind of feel this huge
Hmm.
tension, and that folks don't know why the world hasn't stopped what's going on in Gaza, because if that hasn't stopped, what is going to stop things from happening in the West Bank? So it's kind of the big takeaway. And that still all the Palestinians that we met with, a great amount of hope. Like we're not going anywhere. We still have hope. And we're like,
Hmm.
okay. I mean, even though they fully reason not to, but so
Yeah.
there's some weightiness and a lot of worry, but also this kind of still sense of this is home and we're not going anywhere. So
Hmm.
yeah, so those yeah, a couple weeks there, very intense, but good, meaningful time.
Hmm. Well, yesterday I just went to the Philadelphia Flower Show, which is
Yeah,
just enormous.
yeah,
So if you're a plant lover, and there must be something like that in San Francisco
oh
too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's wild. I'm one that I don't know anything about plants. It's all experimental, and I figured out which ones could just survive well. But I have like we have rain barrels in our yard now, so we all use rainwater to I
Eh,
talk to them. My spouse won't talk to my plants when I'm away, but that's okay. That kind of stuff. So I just love, there's just something about seeing them continue to grow and propagate and, so it's good. I do have one dog that she's trying to eat them though, which is kind of a pain. It's like,
That would be a problem.
I'll come one time and there's like this just like plant carnage all across the floor because she decided just one plant that's been there for a year, all of a sudden today looked yummy. So
Go figure.
who knows? Yeah, dogs.
All right. Well, as I said, the first thing we want to talk about is Bruce's new book, Everything Good About God is True, Choosing Faith. So tell us how that book came
How'd it
about.
come about? Yeah. So there's a couple of ways that it kind of came about. I had been noodling around with a statement of faith, or what we called in the book a faith montage, that was a little bit more than just a poem or a prayer, but it was just kind of laying out one version of the Christian faith that I grew up with, have understood to be true, have in many ways, I was a church planter for a long time, so helped to start congregations, so that the things that we would talk about with people who are brand new to the church, West Coast people actually had no church experience, and so weren't coming out of a negative. It was just like, we actually don't know anything, and so would lay that out in many ways. So I started to think about what would it look like to hand somebody something to prime that for folks. Um, and then what I began to learn as I was sharing with people was folks were like, yeah, we don't really know about this either. And we've been in the church for a long time. And now it's too late. And now it's too long. We can't, it's like when you don't remember somebody's name, but you've been hanging out with them for a year, you can't really then ask them, but what's your name again? So, so that was the other part. So I actually pitched this book to one publisher and they turned it down.
Wow.
It was a little surprising. Ego took a little hit, but most authors, as you know, right, you get
Yeah.
rejected
Oh,
multiple
yeah.
times. So somebody found out that it had been rejected, that Broadleaf approached me and said, hey, basically we can't read another book on deconstruction. And this feels like what's next. It wasn't a dig on deconstruction at all, but
Just an
I was like,
oversupply of books, right?
yeah, there's just everybody's doing deconstruction.
Yeah.
And I don't come out of an evangelical background. I don't come out of I have a very healthy, um, lovely mainline progressive Christian upbringing. And so I write out of that. And so I know other folks have to write out of that pain, and that's really helpful for people, but that's not what I
Yes.
come out of. So they asked me, well, can you write the what's next book? Basically, can you write a book on Christianity and what you think it looks like next? And I'm like, well, yeah, I guess that's kind of a daunting task. So it is when people ask me what's it on, I'm like, well, it's Christianity. But and in 45,000 words, and I'm like, okay. So 40 to 45,000 words. What we've been able to do is to basically give what's, as they're talking about, the sweeping primer of progressive Christianity. And I'm really proud of it. I'm really excited about it. And so it took, surprisingly, I thought it was like 2.5 years, but it's only an 18-month process from
Hmm.
initial contact to publishing, which is, as you
That's
know,
pretty quick.
pretty fast. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, really
Well, good,
fast.
good for you and good for
So,
Broadleaf.
yeah, yeah,
So, I mean, it would be easy to say that the book is intended for people that are brand new to Christianity, but I think, as you said, it's
yeah.
also kind of like for these people that are been maybe, I don't know, not casually affiliated with
Yeah.
Christianity, but maybe not deeply.
Well, I think the mainline church has, unfortunately, taught Christianity by osmosis, and we thinking that
Yeah.
was enough to get people by. And I think what we've all discovered is that folks are still inquiring about what things mean, and so much of what we do is because, not to, this phrase is a little overused, but like we do it because we've always done it that way. That really has been true, and so we've lost meaning out of why, with the ritual we do, the structure of worship we might have, the forms of government. So like, why are those meaningful? And what I'm trying to do is to give a theological understanding, and then like, here's what it means on the ground. So trying to do, baptism in 2,000 words, both on what does this mean for our faith, but also, well, the question people will ask is, well, why do some people sprinkle and some people dunk and full immersion and, like all the things, without saying one is better than the other, and really trying to embrace, same like denominations. I don't talk about denominations being bad, right? I just feel like there are different ways that we've all come to the faith, and that we all play a role, and here's the ways they might be different, but they're not, I'm not like denominations are dead and that's the only option we have for the future. I'm like, well, they're dead, and certainly the way they were in the 50s, but they still, so I think it's for a lot of folks. I think the overall thing is, here's encouragement and challenge and example of how to articulate your faith. And that's for everyone. And so if I can gain some accessibility in different ways, that's what I think this does well. And I think it for some pastors who are having a hard time articulating their faith as well, this is an easy starter for, okay, this helps us prime people for conversations we're going to have in a church. And I've heard that lots of folks are using it as a congregational read, as a way to kind
Good.
of, yeah. So there's one church is using it as their Lenten study already. So we got the
Kind of a
books early.
rebirth, like a
Yeah.
rebirth
Yeah.
type of a
Oh yeah. It
book.
fits
Yeah.
really well. Somebody asked, are we going to do a curriculum? And I'm like, no, because I'm not a curriculum person. But there's questions at the end, and your pastors
Yeah.
can figure out how to ask questions and all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, it fits really well into anything. Now, if you're a super academic, this is not the book. Like I'm not. Again, I don't pretend to, and I think that's the disclaimer that people don't have to offer with this book. I think in some of those sweeping, books that we would have read in seminary, if you give them to folks, who are not looking for that kind of, perspective, you're not having to tell people, well, it's kind of academic. I mean, that's not me. So you're being able to say, well, I mean, the disclaimer is like, well, he's from the West Coast. I mean, I don't know what disclaimers you're going to give, but it's too academic or it's too heady. Actually, it's super accessible. I hope that's kind of the give. I'm really hoping like church adjacent, Christian adjacent people are going to read this. That's why I want to know if it really kind of touches on too. So anyway, yeah, so it really is kind of broad for folks. At least that's what I hope.
So I'd like to read a couple excerpts from
Sure.
the book. This one, I think, kind of gets at the essence of the book too. You say it's incumbent upon Christians in the United States who believe that our faith has been hijacked to offer something better. I think that's a really important aspect of this book.
Yeah. Yeah, we wanted to make sure that so one of the things I think with a lot of new faith expressions is I think they center conservative evangelicalism. They give it far too much power in defining what is next. So while I didn't want to pretend that didn't exist, but I'm not going to let that version of Christianity center and get all the energy for what I believe. But at the same time, it does form why and how we have to do this work. And that, at the beginning, I really kind of, we try to take people right back to, 2020 and put you in the right, what was happening right now. And now here's this version that dominates our media and our culture and, is the go-to thing. And we can decide, well, that's just wrong, and then not do anything, or we can decide we could try to gain some traction in that space to make people at least think, oh, there are different versions of this thing called Christianity. And so I always appreciate reporters that talk about conservative evangelical Christianity because at least that they know there's different other versions. When people say, well, Christianity this, I'm like, okay, that's where we need to get some
Yeah, no, I
inroads
think
in.
it's important to not
Yeah.
only make the distinction, but also to present a faith,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and
And we can do it in a way. This is the thing where I think a lot of folks, when you get to the evangelism section, where I have no interest in trying to reclaim the word evangelism. I think that's uh, not a good case of a good use of energy. But there is this sense of the only way we can talk about our faith is this way that we don't like. And I'm like, well, that is kind of short-sighted and
yeah,
creative, right? Like we can share our faith in a way that makes sense to us and do that well so others hear it. So I think that's where the challenge and the push for me, for folks is, yeah, share it and do it in a way that is true to who you are, but share. Like it, and that's it. I think we just assume it's only in this, terrible way. And that's the only way. I'm like, well, that's just not true. That's lazy and a cop out. So
So another thing you say in the book is, isn't that kind of arrogant, you may say?
yeah.
How dare you claim that what you believe is better than anyone else? Isn't that what you accuse them of doing?
Yeah.
So what's your answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is always an element or if you claim that something is a better. Now, I think where I stop short is I'll never tell somebody that they're not Christian. Like I'll never say, and I have friends, we have friends that will say, well, that's not Christian. I'm like, well, I am not one to say whether that is Christian or not. I have a different version that I think is better. than that, and it's a better alternative. So, I mean, you can always be accused of being, arrogant about saying something is better or not. But I come at it, and I think pretty clearly that it is a way, not the way. It is a version, not the version. Whereas I think the other side of this would say, no, they have the way, and
Right.
this is
Yeah.
the only way you can go in order to be true to God. And I'm like, well, God
Maybe
is kind
not.
of amazing. Yeah. And, the Romans passage for me that says, do not repay evil with evil. I love that passage. It's a
Uh,
challenge for me because it then says, because God will heap coals upon their tongues, right? So that God takes care of it. Like if it's wrong, it's not your job. Like bless those who curse you. And if something needs to be taken care of, you hope it's not you. I mean, at the end of the day, I hope it's not me that is the one that's wrong. But if the other version is not the one, God will take care of that at the end of the day. So I don't have to worry about, dehumanizing and dismissing the other too much.
no, I feel the same way. It's like when I established Compassion Christianity, there was this temptation to make a list of things. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right. And I said, nope, I'm not going to have like a, statement of faith that you have to abide
Right.
by in order to be part of
Right.
this community. I said, it's up to you to decide whether you're a Christian.
Right.
You
Right. I
know,
mean, the litmus testing is difficult. I mean, that's there because there are some things, right, where you have to say, what space do you protect in some ways to still, everybody, I'm fine with anybody calling themselves a Christian, but how do you also protect some spaces when there are behaviors within that are conflict? Like
yeah.
that whole all are welcome idea in a church context. I always tell progressive churches that say, well, all are welcome. Like, well, that's not actually true. And so, and I don't want it to be true. Like I want, beliefs can be welcome, but all behaviors are not welcome. And so, that kind of,
That's a
that
good point.
line, whereas and honestly, it's harder to do, to have a more fluid, broad
Yeah.
understanding and openness than to have this kind of litmus test. You have to sign these 10 things in order for us to acknowledge that you are a true Christian or you can, work in this institution or those kind of
Yeah.
things. So, I mean, kudos to us for trying to live in complexity.
Okay, so here's one more
Yeah.
excerpt. This is where you're talking about the title of the book.
Hmm.
What one person perceives as good may not be experienced as good by another. Yet goodness exists outside our human definition of it, both mine and yours. I think that is very profound, and it's a reality that I think gets overlooked a lot of the times, including by myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was all one of the, it's interesting to see how much I think conservative evangelical Christianity has informed people because a lot of folks have um, like, well, what about all the bad things that God does? Right? I mean, because there's the
Yeah,
assumption that,
yeah,
are the way that people respond is like, well, you know, God has done all these things, or, well, if all these things were happening, then God would do this. And I'm like, well, that's a version of Christianity that unfortunately I don't believe in. And I mean, that part has been like, wow, how good of a job that version has done at infiltrating the,
yeah.
the mind and collective awareness of that we can't believe in there is this greater goodness that is out there, and we are trying to figure out how to align ourselves with it. And that there is something about that idea that I find extremely comforting and exciting, where others are like, no, 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 this God wrathful, vengeful thing that people have been using as a weapon against me and my people or whoever, that's the real God. I'm like, that's just not. And
Well,
so,
one of the things
yeah,
that strikes me about that sentence that I read was that I've always felt like it's kind of presumptuous for us as humans to think we really understand God or
yeah,
really understand good
yeah,
or evil,
yeah,
right? I mean, those are beyond our abilities, I
yeah,
think. You
yeah.
know,
And we do our best in the context in which we
yes,
live, and we're trying to figure out how to align it. When I talk about sin and some other things and revealing of a plan, like it's not that it's all set up and we're just these like our agency is really valid. And so how do we just kind of try to keep figuring it out? And that's where for me, there's just so much liberation in the idea that there is this ability for us to shift and move, and same for God. And we're just trying to figure, and we're never really going to know. Like we're
Yeah,
never really going
exactly.
to know.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's the point.
but part of the
Just as we would
adventure,
try, and it doesn't mean
yeah,
we shouldn't try,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
I
That's
mean,
part of the adventure. It's like
yeah.
we're
Well,
figuring it out.
yeah. I mean, if sin is the separation from God, then the opposite of that is trying to get closer to God,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
so in an active way,
yeah,
even
yeah,
knowing that we're never going to, figure it out.
yeah. And that God's moving towards us, we're moving to, and there's this yearning, and we're trying to figure it out. I mean, it's just such a lovely, I think, metaphor for just as you're kind of walking with somebody in your life, right? There's times your ebbs and flows of how close you are together and how far. I mean, it just you're growing together. I mean, it's just I think it gives me comfort in moving through the world that there isn't this static, rigid there's the answer's already there. It's just you have to figure it out, like it's a riddle of some kind. I'm like, well, I just don't believe that
No,
God does
no.
that with us. So,
So the next question has to do with a term that you used a moment ago that you use in the book, faith montage.
mhm. Yeah,
You
yeah,
want to describe that to people, what you mean by that?
yeah. So because I never liked doing anything particularly normal. So in regular like your faith journey, your faith statement, all that kind of thing. But what I found was that I wanted to be a little bit more like, I don't know, more fluid, more creative, and it just kind of really just moved and flowed. I mean, it's long. If you read it at the back of the book, the whole thing, it's long. But what I've found is people are using it as in worship spaces as call to worship or confess, and they're just grabbing parts of it. And that was my whole idea, is it takes parts out of a journey that you could almost stand aside. They could stand alone, but also when you put them all together, you kind of see this pathway. And I'm a kid of the 80s, and the montage in movies were always the like every movie had this montage where you move it moved the story along really quickly, but you kind of got glimpses of it all the way through. And so that's where we went with it as a way just to kind of nod to that genre, but also this idea that each piece can stand alone in many ways, but it put together, it moves you from one place. It moves you from this greater understanding of God and the world all the way to, all right, so what does it mean when we go out and live it? Like at the very end is like, okay, so what does this all mean when you go and move through the world? I use the term move through the world a lot. And my editor, who a common friend, said, okay, you have to stop using that phrase in the book. I think she said, you used it 21 times in the first draft.
Oh, that's good.
It's like, okay. And then I'm like, okay, so I gotta think of a different, like, how do you reframe the same idea? I love good editors. Shout
Yes.
out to Valerie, who's my editor, was
Yes.
amazing, amazing, really tender. Authors could probably often be a little bit sensitive, but and as much as I try not to be, that first draft when you get back after it's but there's like 1,000 edits or something on a thing. It's like, can I just hit accept all? She's like, no, you have to actually look at them all. I'm like, but I trust you. So yeah, but that was one of them. There were a couple other ones, but that was certainly one. It was like you have to use a different phrase than move through the world. Yes, ma'am.
So there are several excellent endorsements of the book. I'd like to read this one from Brian McLaren.
Mm.
He says your book names the parts of religion that so many of us are trying to get away from. And he introduces an understanding of faith in God that so many of us would like to be a part of. So I know this is difficult to summarize, but how do you go about building this?
Yeah, I love that when I got that endorsement from Brian, all the endorsements when we got them were like, oh, they're getting what we're trying to do. I mean, that was really, and some of the reviews that are coming in now where folks are like, I'm really glad that what we were trying to create is hitting in the way that we had hoped. I think part of it is really how the book is laid out, right? We acknowledge those things that have informed what we believe now. And so we're not trying to pretend as if there hasn't been hurt and harm in faith, but we don't let it define us, and we don't center our whatever is next around that. Because I feel like when we center something on what we're not, it just loses steam as that thing goes. It's like centering your faith on fear, right? As soon as that
Yeah.
fear
Yeah.
is gone, then what's left? And so what I try to do is give people enough challenge and encouragement to move through the whole book, right? To really move through it. And I hope it keeps people's attention enough to spark ideas about their own thinking about each of these areas. And so the challenge is, are you serious about figuring out how you articulate your faith? And if you are, then this can be a companion for that. And that's what I hope. Like, again, I'm not, wherever you've come from, however bad, negative, you may need to read a deconstruction book or two. That certainly might be, because I just don't do that part. But once you're ready to kind of think about what is next, this is the companion piece for that, for you or community to kind of walk through. And the challenge is it's not, at the very beginning, I talked about we're all theologians, that this is not an exercise for the academics or the trained. This is an exercise for all of us. And so while we don't go around saying I'm a theologian, like that's not, we are, we talk about God, and we study who God is for us. And so, I think that challenge is like, okay, so let's take this seriously now. And here's something that you can take along the way. So.
Well, good. It's a great book, and I really recommend it to folks. But I'd like to shift gears now and talk
Yep.
about the general concept of finding your next calling.
Mhm.
You've been a pastor for many years,
Yes.
but you've also been an author and done other entrepreneurial related things.
Yes.
So, what led you to do that, to kind of go off on your own and start
Uh,
doing new things?
Arrogance. No, I'm just, I mean, I think so. I've always had, I've always had deep confidence in my skills, right? Sometimes that certainly goes into hubris and arrogance, like for anyone. But I've always had a deep confidence and excitement about sharing faith and what that means. So when I was my first call, 20 was ordained in 95. So however long ago that was now, right? Are we getting to 30 years? We are getting to 30
Yeah,
years
yeah,
almost, right?
close.
So it was a little church that wanted to read a redevelopment, and we grew that church. And I, generationally, uh, was able to speak to young adults that were around my age, kind of thing, right? Mid-20s, or we getting into their 30s, and I just felt like because my upbringing was a faith that was active in the community, was open, and was, affirming of LGBTQA people, was social justice oriented and Jesus centered, all of that was just normal to me. And so when I talked about it, people just were like, oh, look at you talking about Jesus a lot and you're progressive. Huh. And that was a norm for me. So I was like, oh. So it wasn't, I didn't have to learn how to do that. I didn't learn how to reintegrate those two things. And so I've always had that in me. So that's been the common thread all the way through everything I've done. So the ways I've done it have only been like the vessel with which I've just talked about the integration of life, faith, justice. And so whether that was in church planting, so after my first call, I wasn't ready to grow a church that was older to get younger, and I totally flamed out because I wasn't ready for the power dynamics when an older church
Hmm.
says they want to grow and then they grow, but a lot of our churches don't really want to grow. So I just wasn't equipped for that, flamed out of that. And then was invited to start a new church in San Francisco, which people would have thought would have been a progressive, multi-ethnic Presbyterian church. Folks are like, well, that's insanity. That's not going to work. But we did it, and it's still going. So what forced me the first time to switch gears into the mechanism about how I would do my work was after about 14 years of being the founding pastor, I'd begun to talk with other founding pastors about how they left, transitioned, didn't leave, whatever. And most of them said that they stayed a few years too long. And that, the church that you start is never going to tell you it's time to leave unless you do something that is worthy of you needing to leave, right? Which we've seen.
Yeah.
But most of them are not going to say, okay, I think it's probably time. And I didn't want to get to that point. So I ended up leaving when the church was doing really well and felt like it was hard. It was the first time most of them have ever had a pastoral transition. So I wanted to do it while leadership was strong, while they could handle figuring out how to work through this Presbyterian system we had. And they found a new pastor who was amazing and they kept going. So, but then I didn't have a job. I mean, that was like, I left without something to go to, which people thought was really weird, but I really felt like this was a call out now. I needed to figure out, like for me and the community, what was next. So by that point, I had served, as you had mentioned, the moderator of our denomination, which is for Presbyterians a big deal. Most of the other world doesn't care, but so I had this little space where I could start writing and speaking, and then I got connected with a group called Red Letter Christians,
Hmm.
Tony Campolo group, who really help nurture itinerant speakers who really feel like it's a calling and a place where you can ask the questions that may basically make you look like a jackass if you ask them in public, like, how much should I charge for people to come hear me talk, right? But like this is a space that's where we were all doing this work,
Mhm.
and we could have honest conversations, and people could tell you like, well, you're not that known, so you can't charge as much as this person. But and I remember Brian McLaren saying, eventually you're charging for your time away from your family. Like you so value yourself enough. Tony Campolo said to me, you always give a discount to your family. So Presbyterians are going to be cheap with you, and that's okay. Like they're the ones who got you to where you are.
Uh,
Said, but don't let the Methodists and UCCs be cheap with you. Right. I mean, it was very like that, those kind of conversations you can only have in a space. And so they really helped me. So it wasn't just I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm gonna like, and this was in line with me. I've always been pretty strategic about the things that I do. And I love experimenting, but I want to give myself a decent chance to succeed. And so started to begin to do that work, writing and going out and speaking. And so I did that for about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years during the heyday of the emergent church. I was part of all of those. I was the safe mainline person to be invited to those things, which I appreciated and loved. And then I felt an urge to go back to the church. And so over the last, I'd say 5 years, I've found this really sweet spot of working part-time at a congregation and writing and speaking and doing some other things so that I keep my foot in this ministry that I love. I love just being pastoring people and preaching on Sundays and pushing people towards this more just faith, and writing and speaking and using that platform to reach more people and talk with more people. So that's really where I am now, is I'm doing these short-term part-time gigs in churches and still writing. And everybody knows I'm full out, like, here's the work that I do. Like you get all of me. And like, I'm not going to pretend that I'm one person and another. But I also like, I want to be in the church and help them in the context that they are. Like most of the churches I wish are more progressive outwardly and everything, but that's not my job to make them that way. But I'll help them if that's where they want to head. We'll kind of lay groundwork. And so I love all of that. So I found this like both and it suits my personality well. It suits my energy level well. My health, I had long COVID and still have some things that I deal with. And I really have to focus on how much I love to work out. And like I can do that and I can do two other things a day and that's all I do.
Hmm.
And really having to, and again, should we have always been doing that? Probably. But now my body gives out after about 3 or 4 days of not taking a
Hmm.
break. And
Hmm.
so I just love it. I don't feel guilty about not being productive. I don't know if it's age or if it's whatever it is, but I'm a 3 on the Enneagram for those of you that are Enneagram people. And I just I don't get my worth from my productivity as much as I used to. I still certainly get jazzed by things that go well and things that I'm known for and do, but not to the, I think, unhealth that I used to. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know.
So, given all that you've experienced, from a discernment
Mhm.
standpoint now,
Yeah.
how do you look at things? What resources do you have, whether it's people or books or prayer
Hmm.
or meditation or whatever, do you
Yeah.
use for discernment?
So one of the main ones is I have a group that I've been meeting with for the last 26 years, 27 years, I think. I think it was my second or third year in ministry. Our denomination, the Presbyterian Church USA, we had an urban ministry office. And what we were discovering was that people who especially went to urban ministry were leaving after less than 5 years.
Hmm.
And not just leaving and going to another church, they were leaving the ministry.
Hmm.
And so brilliant prophet of the church, a gentleman by the name of Phil Tom, who is still doing amazing things. Phil's in his 70s and is still causing good problem all over the place. He found some money and he said to me and one other person, said, design whatever you need to do to not just survive, but to thrive.
Hmm.
So we gathered a bunch of us, and back when we had money every year, 10, 15, 20 of us would gather in a different city
Hmm.
and take a book or a study or something and help each other discern life and ministry. And we've been meeting now every year. Now there's no more denominational money. We all help cover each other depending on what's happening. We decided though we can no longer sleep on floors in the last couple of years. We were like, okay, our sleeping bag on floors times might be a little bit done. We're all in our 50s now, and we're like, but we're still gathering, and there's a
Wow.
core of about 12 of us, and every year it's a place where we had an early stage where like no rock stars or no rock star mentality in the room, and then some of us go become like the highest elected office in our denomination, and like some of us written books, but it's the place where I can be like, okay. I can discern and think through stuff. And this is throughout the year. We Zoom throughout the year. Just a place where nobody, you know, my bio does not matter to them. They've known me through all the struggles and everything. And that has been, I will say, the biggest thing for me is that group and then the ways those conversations have manifested individually throughout. And then seasonally, I have a coach, so I will, 2 or 3 times a year for a couple of months at a time, I'll have a coach that will help me work through some things that I'm thinking about, whether it's a project or it's a discernment of a decision I'm going to make. Um, and then the other thing is for good or bad, sometimes I just try stuff.
Well, if
Um,
you're not experimenting enough, right? Taking a little bit of risk here and there,
Yeah,
then
and most of the things I try, like I'm not betting our estate on anything. Like I'm not doing those kind of things, but I'm
yeah,
like
yeah.
I'll throw my name in there. I'll have that conversation. I'll do this and we'll see what happens. And I'm at the stage where I can say no, that doesn't feel like that works for me anymore or whatever. Like I think I'm one of those that options don't freak me out, and so I'm like I'll just sure I'll have that Zoom call and see how it goes, or I'll show up to this event or this action and check it out, or those kind of things. So I'm always just like the spirit moves in ways that we don't really always understand, and who knows what an introduction can create.
Yes.
I don't even remember how we met, right? But
Oh, probably Brian McLaren referred
yeah,
me to you, is my
probably
guess.
just said, hey, and you probably had just sent a note out and said, hey, do you want to hop on a Zoom? And we probably
Yeah,
did, and look at us
yeah,
now,
yeah.
years
We've
later.
collaborated in all kinds of
Yeah,
different ways since then, so
exactly.
which is wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And there's so much option value that you can't predict in advance,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
In terms of fruitful relationships.
Yeah, yeah. And then I will say I go to church every Sunday. What like if I'm preaching or not preaching, every church service that I lead or and or go to or just attend, I want to have a spiritual experience. Like I always feel like if a pastor feels like leading worship becomes a job,
Hmm.
then that's a cue. Like if you're not moved by the worship you experience and create, then nobody else is going to be. And
Hmm.
so I try to go to church, like to not just the place, but the experience every Sunday. And when I'm on vacation, I go. Like I'm not one that when I go on vacation, I don't go to church. I find somewhere and find some community that's gathered because the Spirit's brought them together and find some. And I don't go and critique. Like I know some people have a hard time going to church because they want to critique everything, and I'm like, now if it's bad and they say terrible things, I might in my back of my head. But I'm like, every community is living this out in the best way they can. And so I do a little research, so I'm not going to go set myself up for failure, but and I've just my wife and I, we discovered some amazing little communities that, aren't shiny and, all that kind of stuff on the outside but are just like these deeply meaningful,
Hmm.
lovely places
Hmm.
that if they just learned how to share their faith differently, could actually like have more people impacted, not necessarily grow like leaps and bounds, but at least have more people understand what they're trying to do to give them a possibility of making more impact in the community. Anyway,
Well, maybe your book will help them do
I hope so. I really do. I feel like I don't want it to be like, I want to challenge enough to say, like, okay, if you're going to just badmouth all these other Christians, which do they deserve or not? It's up to you. You can't just you got to offer something else. If you claim to be Christian as well, it's one thing if you're not Christian, go for it. Like you feel free. I mean, you don't have a dog in something, but if you are, then well, okay, so tell me what's a different version of this. If this one's so terrible, what's the alternative? And we have it, we know it. We just don't have the confidence or courage to share it.
Hmm. Hmm. Or the ability to articulate it.
Or the ability, yeah, yeah. Haven't been encouraged to do
we
it.
haven't done a
Really.
good job of that.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think, Broadleaf wanted your book so badly
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
why it's so needed and why
Yeah.
it's so valuable. So
I hope so. That's my hope.
so I know you're in the midst of a new book launch, but I have to
Yes.
ask you anyway. I mean, is there anything out on the horizon that you got planned that you want to talk
So
about?
it's so funny. Somebody, so we just launched the book. We're recording this on whatever date it is. So it's 2 days ago on March 5th. And somebody was like, so what's next? Because normally I would know what's next. Like I would have something. And I was like, I actually have no idea. This is the biggest book project I've ever done. And I don't have a team. Like I do have a publicist now. I don't have an agent. Like I'm not at that level of anything. I'm thinking about that maybe for the next thing. But right now, so I'm doing all logistics. I have a part-time job being my terrible team. Every once in a while, I'm firing my whole logistics team because they suck. And I have to get back. I'm like, oh no, I didn't respond to this person. But I think I have. So I'm planned out all the way through June for the most part. And now it's other people bailing on me or having to switch or whatever. It's not me saying, so it's just far better that when it comes that direction. So I've really been working on trying to make sure again that I don't lose money on this tour, but that I'm able to kind of get the word out, get the book out, talk with people, build some. They Broadleaf thinks this has long-term
Good,
staying, so
good.
really kind of get it into places, and so that's all I've been doing. There are some other I love this bridge pastor thing, so there are folks I've told people like in the fall I might be ready for something. And a lot of these bridge pastor things, the great thing is folks don't always know when they're going to come.
Hmm.
Like something happens in a church and they're like, oh no, this church needs somebody to walk with them for the next 3 months because this thing just happened. And
Hmm.
that's where I would come in. And I'm
Hmm.
like, all three of my adult children are out. I mean, I can almost respond within, a few weeks if I need be. And if it's a cool enough city. And I'm also like, I have a friend who's in Australia now, and I'm like, if you need a bridge pastor, anytime,
There you go.
just give me a call. I can't move to Australia permanently, but I would love to live there for 3 or 4
I hear
months.
you. I hear you.
But
Well, we'll
yeah,
keep
so
us posted. Whatever ends up being next, please keep us
oh
posted.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, my life is online, so everybody will know as soon
Yes,
as the right thing
yes.
happens.
So again, the book is Everything Good About God is True, Choosing Faith. Please check it out. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for all your wonderful work and best wishes with all of it.
Well, thank you for your friendship. Grateful for you, your health, and all the things that you do for so many of us. So thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much.